Welcome back to this presentation about the research group Earth System Data Exploration at the Jülich Supercomputing Centre. This is part 2 of this lecture, where we discuss why we analyze Earth system data and specifically related to air quality and weather. Now let me move on to the topics of our group and starting with Earth system data. So we analyze Earth system data specifically related to air quality and weather. So why is that? So we are at the interface really between Earth system science and HPC technology development, as I mentioned earlier, and basically our group is providing an application to the use of supercomputing resources and also the development of federated systems with a very societal relevant topic. And our mission is to actually develop working solutions and real science, basically. So we should make progress in Earth system sciences, while at the same time demonstrating basically the use of these computing capabilities and potentially even contributing to the development of new concepts and system designs. So this diagram, I apologize for the quality of this. I've actually been trying to hunt it down and found the original publication, but even there was no high quality reproduction possible. So I'm continuing that search, and maybe eventually we can replace it with a better quality diagram. But it's actually a key diagram that for the first time described the Earth system as a whole. So the so-called Brotherton diagram. There's a paper by Brotherton, actually from 1985. Where he describes basically the Earth system and its relations. In short, basically what you can see on the left-hand side are external forcings. So things that are basically not in the control of the planet, so to speak. So there's solar and space plasma as external drivers, but also volcanism. Some people would claim, oh, this is part of the Earth system, but for the classical picture of the Earth system, it's not. And on the right-hand side, you see these two brown boxes there, impact on human activities and human activities. So basically humans as actors both influence the Earth system, but also are impacted by Earth system changes. And then in the middle, you see two major blocks, basically. So on the top, the physical climate system, on the bottom, the biogeochemical systems, and they're coupled through manifold interactions. They're also structured. So in the physical climate system, you see here on top the atmospheric physics and dynamics, then ocean dynamics and terrestrial surface, moisture and energy balance. Newer versions of this diagram would also put the cryo system as a separate system there. And on the bottom, you have the biogeochemical cycles, again split into marine biogeochemistry, terrestrial ecosystems, and tropospheric chemistry. Note that stratospheric chemistry is not included specifically in this block, but actually put to the left side. Bring between the two parts of physical climate system and biogeochemical cycles, because in the stratosphere you have a very close interaction between chemistry and dynamics. So the two factors cannot be separated, which is easier done in the other compartments here. And then the things that you cannot read are just specific interactions. So for example, CO2 can lead to acidification of the oceans, and whatever other cycles can spin off from this. And clearly this kind of diagram has evolved over time, and there are newer versions of this available with even more interactions between these compartments. Let me say a word why what we do is actually relevant. And the specific topics that we selected for our groups, which are air quality and weather. And the relevance, of course, primarily stems from the impacts of these processes. And for air pollution, there are more than the three that are shown here, but those three are key aspects of air pollution impacts, and in particular they are the three impacts that were selected also for analysis in the tropospheric ozone assessment report, one of the key projects we're working on, and I will come back to that later. So you see here health impacts on the left-hand side. And just a few words on those. So the top shows you a X-ray image of a ozone damaged lung tissue. Actually, if you go to the website, you will see a comparison how a healthy lung looks like and the damaged lung. But what's important to note here is that air pollution impacts actually have two different timescales associated with them. So we're looking at short-term effects, which are mostly respiratory effects, so exacerbation of asthma, coughing, wheezing, and shortness of breath. And long-term effects, which are more inflammatory related. So these are stroke, lung cancer, respiratory conditions, or cardiovascular disease. In the center, you see the impacts of air pollution on vegetation. So the top picture shows you a leaf damaged by ozone air pollution. And for vegetation, impacts actually happen on different scales. So it starts on the cellular or foliar level, impacting the metabolism and physiology of the plants, which then, as you can see, and also from the picture on the top, carries on to damages in the leaf and canopy level. These can then impact plant growth, and impacting plant growth, of course, has important implications for agriculture. So if agricultural crops are damaged through air pollution, you will face yield losses and therefore also strong economic losses. But it can also go on then to underground processes, so impacting the root system and other things, including soil carbon storage. And taken together, all these impacts on plants actually affect the so-called ecosystem-based services, which are basically the foundation of our life. So, I mean, humans, as we eat and live and use water and other things, are crucially dependent on a functioning ecosystem. And so basically air pollution can impact the functioning of these ecosystem services. The third huge impact of air pollution is related to climate. And here's a snapshot on top of just a drought condition of the soil. And this also, of course, immediately points to the fact that there are feedback processes between these different Earth system components. So if the soil is drying out, then plants will die basically, and this, of course, in turn will affect the ecosystem functioning again and other factors. So the little table that you see there in the bottom is taken from the Clean Air Coalition, Clean Air and Climate Coalition, and highlights four major short-lived climate forcers. Two of them are in the focus of our group independently. The third one is indirectly associated. So black carbon and tropospheric ozone. So black carbon is part of the aerosol pollution, and one could relatively easily extend this to just go from specifically black carbon to aerosol in general. You see sources here from black coal, diesel exhaust, and also biomass for cook stoves. Methane is a long-lived pollutant. For atmospheric chemistry terms, it's long-lived. For climate, it's still a short-lived climate forcer. Sources here are natural gas, livestock, and landfills. Tropospheric ozone, one of the key focus species of our group, is not directly emitted, but it rather is formed in the atmosphere from precursor sources. So other compounds like methane, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, and volatile organic compounds play a role in forming tropospheric ozone. And finally, hydrofluorocarbons, they don't really feature in terms of air pollutants, but can impact the climate. They're coming from air conditioning and refrigeration primarily. What you see on the right-hand side is the scale of the impacts, and they are related to the lifetime of these compounds. So the shorter-lived aerosol species and tropospheric ozone have largely local scale and regional scale impacts, although there are also some global scale impacts feasible, whereas the somewhat longer-lived species like methane and hydrofluorocarbons are truly of global impact. So there it doesn't really matter who releases them, the whole Earth will be affected by them. We also, of course, have impacts from weather, and these impacts primarily are related to severe weather. Of course, the other big changes occur from slow changes in weather, which are then known as climate change. But since climate concerns even longer time series, our group is focusing primarily rather on weather phenomena, and therefore the relevance of this is more related to extreme events and extreme weather situations. And just to pick a few here, we can look at flooding and landslides, we can look at storms, or we can look at heat and fires and drought episodes. And then, of course, these are feeding back into other ecosystem cycles. So if you have a storm and you destruct a forest, then, of course, this will have impacts on, again, the plant functioning, also things like biogenic emissions from these plants. And, of course, as the forest is gone, there will no longer be damage to the forest be done through air pollution. So relevant research and relevant Earth system science research in particular is key to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So they're listed here. And not all of these goals, of course, are related to the environment, but several of these Sustainable Development Goals are indeed, do have a pretty specific link to the environment and air pollution and weather in particular. So one of them is zero hunger. So the food supply critically depends on the weather situation, but also on air pollution. This again, of course, in turn can feed back on poverty. Good health and well-being is related to air pollution. The World Health Organization estimates roughly 3 million deaths per year due to air pollution. Other factors like clean water sanitation can be affected by weather and air pollution. Also clean energy, agriculture and infrastructure. We've seen the images from destroyed roads and other networks, which can, of course, impact sort of development, and so on and so on. And so one of the key activities that we are involved in as a group is this tropospheric ozone assessment report. I mentioned that a few times before, and I think this is really our vehicle where we can be most relevant with respect to society, because this is a large international activity conducted by over 200 scientists around the world. And the mission of TOR is to provide the research community with an up-to-date scientific assessment of tropospheric ozone's global distribution and trends from the surface to the tropopause. And we've seen the impacts on health, vegetation, and climate, and their ozone has a specific role in all of them, either being the most prominent air pollutant there or second after aerosols. And TOR has been conducted in the first phase from 2014-2019. We are just starting the second phase of TOR now. TOR 1 has delivered the first comprehensive tropospheric ozone assessment report based on all available surface observations, the peer-reviewed literature, and new analysis. And this is now where it really comes to our group. TOR 1 has created a database containing ozone exposure metrics at thousands of measurement sites around the world. And these are freely accessible for research on the global scale impact of ozone on climate, human health, and crop ecosystem productivity. So this is really where basically the foundation of our group lies. And we're, I think, very proud to be part of TOR 2 now. And as I said, TOR 2 is just beginning, and there will be this quick start event to inform everyone about TOR 2 on September 16th. To just give you one example, what TOR 1 has accomplished. So with the database that we set up here in Jülich, it was possible to generate the first global scale view of all available surface ozone observations. And what you see here is a trend picture symbolized by these arrows. So if they point downwards, there's a decreasing ozone trend. If they point upwards, there's an increasing ozone trend. And the color indicates the significance, basically, of these trends, so how certain these trends are. And you can see pretty clear signals there in terms of where ozone has changed, in which direction in the different regions. And the metric selected here is the number of days per year that ozone exceeds 70 parts per billion. So I'm not going to explain to you now what 70 parts per billion are and and so on, and what the impacts of this are, but this is one of the most relevant health metrics for assessing the long-term health impacts of air pollution. One point that I think is also key to our group's strategy and mission is that relevant research. So in order to conduct research that's actually relevant for society, we need data, and we need high quality data. And here on purpose, I have not listed the air quality data that we are dealing with, but rather some meteorological data sets. So just one example is the global radiosonde network. Another one is model data from the ECMWF ERA 5 reanalysis. And the third one would be space data, which so far hasn't played a stronger role in our group. But let's see, maybe we can also change that over time. And this indeed is sort of, again, the foundation of our group. So the second foundation, the first one is this TOR activity and initiative that basically gives us an embedding in the international Earth system science community. And the second one is this strategy here, depicted here in the IntelliAQ project, which is a large ERC research grant that funds about half of our group activities. And the concept of this project is really this fusion of different data sets and then developing new analysis methods, here depicted as a deep neural network, in order to basically do relevant Earth system science. I'm not going to go into the details here of these objectives, but it's important to basically understand this general concept that we're trying to exploit the synergies of different data sets, put them together, and learn new things from these different data sets through new analysis methods. So the 3 points really are data, methods, and relevant science, and we should try to strike a balance in our group between all of these 3 aspects. Okay, so let me briefly describe a bit what kind of data we already have available in the group and what kind of use we could make from this. So we have these different data types here. So from time series, mostly observational data, we have the geospatial data, usually 2-dimensional data. Most of these are Earth observation data, but there's also other things like the OpenStreetMap server that we're actually running in our group, or just identified yesterday some data sets on point sources like power plants. Then we have the gridded 3-dimensional model data, and finally the Earth observation data, so satellite observations. The content of these is, for the time series, we typically have air pollutant concentrations or weather variables. The geospatial data covers all kinds of mostly land descriptions, if you would like to call them like that. So topography, population density, land cover, etc. And obviously this will have an impact on both the air pollution, but also the weather, for example, in terms of transportation or advection of clouds or rain out in front of mountains and these kind of aspects. Then the model data, we really focus here on weather model data, so weather variables. And for the satellite data, we are primarily looking into column integrates of air pollutant concentrations, things like aerosol optical density or tropospheric ozone columns. Of course, if there's a smart idea of using weather Earth observations, there's no one stopping you from making use of that data either. Sources for these data are also manifold. So for the time series, we have pretty good collaborations with many environmental agencies, with the OpenAQ initiative, with several universities around the world, and also the World Meteorological Organization. With respect to geospatial data, we are taking this primarily from Earth observation institutes like NASA, ESA, OSM, or OpenStreetMap. Weather model data is primarily from either the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecast or the German Weather Service. And the Earth observation data, of course, again, comes from the various space agencies. Format of these data, this concerns technical aspects. After conversion is for time series data and the geospatial data. We're really aiming at making use of database technology here and making these data available through so-called REST APIs. So building machine-to-machine interfaces that we can use these data in our applications and also make them available to others. For the weather model data, we are primarily looking here at file-based access through GRIP and NetZDF format. And the Earth observation data will also be primarily file-based and be stored in HDF5 files. Size of these data, so the time series data are altogether on a scale from gigabytes to terabytes. The geospatial data, since they're mostly two-dimensional, is more on the gigabyte scale. The gridded model data is definitely the largest chunk with terabytes to petabytes, but if you're really getting serious with Earth observation data, this could actually get into similar magnitudes. And finally, storage location, just to make a link here again to the resources provided by the Jülich Supercomputing Centre. So we're using the HDF cloud virtual machines to store the time series data and also the geospatial data. For the weather model data, we are using the Meteor cloud, and if we are getting more serious with satellite data, we shall see where to store those. So potentially this could also be handled on by the Meteor cloud. What I'm showing here is just one example to encourage you all to sort of look beyond the traditional borders of our domain science. And also, if you're curious, exploit new data sets and new technologies. So this is a study that has recently been published from the KIT, so the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, where people used actually the beams from mobile stations to construct precipitation maps through machine learning also. And you can actually see here in comparison with the radar data on the left-hand side that this gives a pretty accurate description. And so it's, I think, a prime example how one can exploit other data sources to actually generate useful information for system science. And so far, we have not really been dealing with these kind of things, but I would be very open if some of you generate ideas, for example, for funding proposals or this, and actually then try to exploit these kind of new data sets in a proposal. Likewise, just to give an indication here, so there might already be work going on, but just to emphasize that so far we've been looking very focused on tropospheric ozone primarily, but I'm still claiming that there's a lot of stuff to be gained from other air pollutants, in particular particles. And I mentioned earlier that particles are even more relevant with respect to human health than ozone. So it's definitely worthwhile looking at them. And so one of the applications I could imagine would be using neural networks to actually automatically classify satellite observations into different aerosol categories. So this is a, I think, very nice image from NASA called Just One Other Day of the Earth, where they employed this kind of classification scheme and identified different features basically on these satellite images. From hurricanes and typhoons to wildfire smoke, agricultural burning, or Sahara dust. And I think using machine learning to learn the typical features of these kind of things would be a worthwhile application. This concludes the second part of this lecture series. In the next part, we are looking into how we explore cutting-edge machine learning for the analysis of environmental data.